Okay guys, we're getting it underway. I'm Kim Antonio and I head up the Food Industry Innovation Program here at the Department of Primary Industries and Regional Development. We were approached a couple of months ago by Costco. We're aware of the fact they were building the new facility out at the airport site, or the airport industrial precinct, and the conversation we had with them initially was around their interest in engaging with West Australian food and beverage producers as potential suppliers to their new superstore. The conversation went a little beyond that as well, because obviously some of the companies we deal with are interested in supplying more than just the West Australian store. So we've also had a conversation with them about the potential of supplying into their network in Australia, and above and beyond that, the potential to supply to them for international markets as well. Recognising that in terms of businesses we engage with, we have all sizes and scales. So we have some that are quite small, right through to those that are actually capable of being an international supplier. The role we're effectively playing for the Thursday event is basically just a conduit, so providing connections between WA businesses and Costco. The event on Thursday, most of you, I'm sure, have registered for that already. If not, then see Patricia and she will help you with that. There will be, it's 6, isn't it, Trish? There'll be 6 buyers from Costco there. They will provide a brief introduction as to their area of speciality, and then as a business, it's your responsibility to identify which of those 6 you'd like to spend your speed dating time with, and it is a short period of time that's been allocated for each of the individual meetings. So with that in mind, we thought it would be useful for businesses to kind of have a little bit of a refresher for those that have done it before, or for those for whom it's new. A few tips on how they might wish to prepare for that engagement. And that also came as a result of a couple of businesses actually saying to us, look, we haven't dealt with a major retailer before. What are some of the things we should be aware of? We approached Samantha Watson, who had been a buyer nationally, both here in Australia for the Woolworths Group and previously for Tesco's in the UK, but it also worked on the other side of the other side of that equation as a national account manager for suppliers to 2 major retailers, to just do a little, what we just called a lunch and learn, just an opportunity to talk a little bit through what buyers might be looking for, how you might prepare for that engagement, and then there'll be a Q&A opportunity at the end of this as well. And I'd like to welcome Sam to give you a brief presentation.
So just to give you a bit of a heads up in terms of what to expect today, knowing that you guys have got to see Costco on Thursday, what I've tried to do is keep this really generic and not specific for Costco. But that said, I'll give you a couple of pointers in case you've not had a chance to do your research on Costco as yet, and I'll do that at the end. I encourage you the whole way through it to ask me any questions kind of at a timely fashion if you think that's appropriate, or feel free to wait till the end. But this is really to give you guys the questions that you should be asking yourself before you're then going and presenting to retailers. So have I covered all of these things? Where would I be sitting in these things? So a bit about me. Worked in FMCG retailing for 19 years. I've worked both sides of the fence, and it depends which side I'm on as to which side is the dark side. So worked for both Tesco's in the UK and Woolworths here. And then since then worked as well as for a national account manager for a major global company, which was GlaxoSmithKline, selling into Coles here, but also Tesco and Morrison's in the UK. I've been consulting for the last kind of 5 years, partnering with small and medium-sized businesses, working with them both in terms of developing their businesses in Australia, and helping them, whether it's from strategic business planning, procurement, in terms of packaging, sourcing, all the way through to putting their plans together in terms of sales channel strategies, as well as kind of pricing and promotional strategies as well, and then to the end of being able to present to the retailer. So, but within all of that, my passion really is, it turns out I quite enjoy looking for that little gem and how to take those consumer insights together and being able to present it to a retailer. It's something that was really instilled in me at Tesco's, and I didn't know it at the time, that I realised as a buyer I spent a lot of time giving feedback to suppliers who would present me things. And when I say feedback to suppliers, I'm talking PepsiCo and Smith's in terms of chips, saying, well, why haven't you put this on the front of the pack? It's your kind of number one message, and giving people like big multiples advice as to why they've missed the key unique selling point. And that's kind of what drove me to kind of moving into more of a consulting world when I moved here to WA. I will be honest, I'm blunt as a sledgehammer, but it's always meant with positive intent. So feel free to ask me any questions. I would not be offended. So in terms of kind of thinking about who you're going to be presenting to, depending upon what meetings you've got coming up and who you are presenting to, there's some questions that I would really encourage you guys to ask yourselves. And the first one is, you know, who am I presenting to? Who's my audience on the day? If you know who that person is, I strongly encourage you to stalk them on LinkedIn and make sure that you are aware of their background and what their buying areas they are in terms of their covering. Along with that, in terms of understanding who the individual you could be presenting to is, what is the company that I'm presenting to? So what's their retail offering? They've all got very different. You've got the grocery multiples of Coles and Woolworths. You've got low-cost discounters, Aldi, Spudshed, obviously just in WA. Then you've got your independents. And then you've got Costco, the big box retailers, and that market will only continue to expand potentially in Australia as well. So understanding what their strategy and what their retail proposition is going to help you no end in terms of understanding how you should tailor your presentation to them. So some of them may be looking for bulk products, whereas others would be looking for smaller products. So for example, Costco is very much a bulk retailer. So instead of presenting to them, for example, 1 kilo bags of potatoes, you might be offering them 2 kilos, 3 kilos and 5 kilos. I use that as an example. So thinking about what they're offering, what their price points are, and therefore then who is their target audience. Within that, one of the big things that always gets missed out is what's their price in terms of retail price, and then what's their promotional strategy. We know very much Coles and Woolworths do a high-low, what we would call a high-low retail price strategy. And what I mean is everyday prices, for example, $2, but then maybe every 4 to 6 weeks, they would discount that by 25% or so on and so forth. So understanding that maybe someone like Aldi, they aren't interested, it's everyday low price for them. And then understanding the fact that they have special job buys, and that's where they really bring their promotions. So really knowing that will enable you guys to kind of understand kind of how you're costing things up. Not my area of expertise, but understanding what food safety certifications they require. As a minimum, everybody really requires HACCP. They've all got their different nuances. But asking and having an idea of what those sorts of things are is really, really important. So, especially in the fresh space. The final one is what trading terms or other logistics requirements do they have? Knowing where their DC is, knowing how many DCs they've got, understanding those sorts of things. Now, probably some of the thoughts that might be going through your head right now is, how am I supposed to know all of this? The first thing I actively encourage you to do, as I've already said, is firstly get on LinkedIn and understand who you're presenting to. Go to all of their corporate pages. Don't just go to their consumer website pages. Make sure you look at their corporate pages. Both Coles and Woolworths have supplier portals that you can go to. Costco do as well, in terms of understanding what their trading terms might be, what their expectations in terms of certification, They'll give a basic understanding in terms of logistics. But regardless of that, on the day when you're having your conversation or your meeting, don't be afraid to ask any questions. The best account managers I came up against as a buyer were the ones who would ask me lots of questions on the day. What are your expectations? How would logistics work? What's your promotional strategy? What's your overall strategy for the category that you're running at the moment? So it looks like you're actively trying to be involved if you are trying to understand that. Now, my last point that I've put on here is what false assumptions am I making? Now, what do I mean by that? I've spent the last 8 years listening to a lot of companies telling me that Coles or Woolworths or so-and-so and so-and-so dealing with them, you know, I know so-and-so and they've gone bust. Now, I know that Coles and Woolworths, as well as some of the IGAs, have all had a reputation of old. In the 15 years ago, there were a lot of companies that suffered at the hands of those companies. Just because you've heard a story, I would actively encourage all of you to make your own opinion and never discount something based on hearsay, and to go and have that meeting or do your own research. You know, you might be thinking, I can't supply all 90 stores in WA. For example, I haven't got capacity to do that with Coles and Woolworths. But Coles and Woolworths will put you in one store if they think the product is right for that store, and they will work with you to grow that business, just the same as you can go and sell independently to IGAs. Now, yes, you still have to go through their head office, but so many companies will say things like, yeah, but I know so-and-so, they did 90 stores, then they got delisted, they went bust, they couldn't do it. You know, really understanding, you know, what's the bad talk going and the negative mind talk going on in the back, or what so-and-so told me. I've got one client who said to me, well, you know, my bank managers told me I should never deal with Aldi. They never pay on time. Well, they pay on 14-day terms. How does your bank manager know that? Well, he's just heard it. I said, well, how about we check their terms and their arrangement and have a chat with the buyer and find out if that's the case? Okay. Well, it turned out they paid on 14 days, and they didn't just pay 14 days. Most months they paid 12 days. So there's always that negative hearsay, and I really encourage you guys to do your own research. Talk to other companies. Don't be afraid to talk to other companies and find out what their experiences are. So before you jump into these things, or before you discount something. Any questions? Very silent. Okay. So you're going in to present to a buyer, and the first thing is you believe you've got this great product and you've got a great brand. But have you defined what your brand attributes are clearly and articulately? Yes.
Can we get a copy of the slides at the end of it?
Absolutely, yeah. So defining what your brand attributes are, what makes you you, and why do you do what you do? That doesn't mean you have to go on a huge, great tangent as to the fact that, you know, you set this business up 20 years ago and so on and so forth. It's more about why you believe your business and your product has a place in the marketplace. And then going on to that, what that unique selling point is of that particular product. How does it add value to the category? So whether it's olive oil, you know, what's different about your product versus what they've already got on shelf, and understanding those sorts of products and from what's on offer. So then within that, it's really important that you know who your competitors are within that space, and then who your competitors are in terms of other spaces. So we know that the olive oil market, for example, has kind of gone from just being purely olive oil to now there's spray olive oil and those sorts of things. So how much is that taken away? Should you be playing in both spaces? And that's what I mean by asking what the sales would be, whether they'd be incremental or substitutable. So if you're adding in your product, is that just going to basically spread the sales across more lines in the category? And at the end of the day, we still haven't come up with the technology of elasticated shelves and elasticated bricks so that we can just expand the stores and expand the shelves. So they're always going to have to look that it's going to be one in, one out, more often than not. IGA is slightly different, but everybody else in terms of the grocery multiples will be very much one in, one out. Yes?
Hi, so what about if you're selling to an online platform? Because I know a lot of retailers, particularly in Asia and overseas, they have like a retail theme park shop front, but they're building their business on click and collect on the back end. So how do you approach their category strategies?
So you're talking people like Habitat in Singapore and those sorts of things.
Yeah.
It varies by kind of in terms of which particular one it is. So Habitat are looking for very much the high-end side of things. If you were talking, for example, Amazon, they've obviously got the capacity to put more than one product on. So they're not necessarily looking for that one in, one out solution, but they are looking in terms of why they should still list that product. It doesn't change. It's still what's going to motivate a customer to buy that product. So when you're putting the strategy together, it's about understanding not only why would the buyer want to list my product, but why is the consumer going to purchase that product and consume that product. So for me, it always goes back to what's my product USP, and therefore how do my brand attributes fit into that. Does that make sense?
It does, but can we assume that there is a degree of elasticity because they've got a digital storefront and they've got, a massive warehouse?
You can, but I wouldn't rely on it. You can assume, but knowing how Habitat are operating at the moment, they're not adding incremental lines at the moment because they're not convinced that the core lines are working. And Amazon are very much similar in terms of their strategy as well. Coles, for example, Coles and Woolworths will have some exclusive online offers, but in terms of understanding they've still got limited space. They don't want to be building the biggest DCs ever. At the end of the day, the DCs, especially in Singapore and Asia, they are still way behind the rest of the world. They are way behind America. So understanding kind of how much they should be putting into the DCs and holding their stock, they still don't have that capability and capacity to do it because they don't have just in time in terms of delivery. So their stock holdings are really high. So when it comes to, for example, Coles have just signed their deal with Ocado to do their online shop, which has had kind of a massive outcry in terms of this new technology. It's going to step change things. Ocado in the UK is fantastic, and it really will change it. Whether it changes the kind of customer experience at the end in terms of the delivery guy smiling and delivering things correctly, but understanding that they can do more online exclusives and being able to tailor your strategy that way. Does that answer everything? Okay.
So, just a question around the unique selling point. If you've done your research and you're looking at your product and competitor products that a retailer you're approaching might already have, and you're struggling to find a point of differentiation, what I've noticed sometimes is that in the conversation that can unfold between the buyer and the potential retailer, there may be something else they're looking for, and possibly in the case of West Australian businesses, we often say, oh well, it's a challenge when you're small, but being small might also mean you're somewhat nimble. What are your thoughts on approaching those conversations quite open to the feedback you might get from the buyer, who might be looking for something with a little bit of a tweak that it's possible you might be able to work towards?
I'm.
Can you just repeat the question?
Pardon?
Repeat the question for the...
Okay. So Kim's just said, what would buyers be open to kind of giving feedback and providing feedback on what USPs would be? Is that what you're saying? So I can't speak for all buyers. I can only speak for me and then some of the buyers that I've dealt with over the last couple of years. Most buyers are really up for having a fluid, open dialogue with you. And it's one of the things that I would strongly recommend, and taking aside the Costco meeting because you've got a very short time frame, when you go in and you go to meet a buyer for the first time, talk to them like they're humans. How's your day been? How's business going? Have you had a rubbish day? Find some level of kind of personal common ground. Don't just walk through to your meeting room and keep it really cold and silent. Try and strike up a conversation. And through your meeting, I mean, you'll get a fairly good indication straight up in terms of whether this buyer is just going to be very much kind of, you know, robot and they're not going to really have much to do with you, or whether they're going to be quite open in terms of dialogue. The buyers of Coles and Woolworths and Aldi that I've had the experience of dealing with, as well as the ones in Southeast Asia, they are very open to dialogue and they want to have input because they don't want people to make the wrong decision, they don't want the wrong packaging, they want people to have thought every part through it. So I would actually encourage you guys to ask a lot of questions and ask for feedback. There's always going to be some buyers, and I hasten to say some of the old school buyers will be like, well, it's your product, why should I tell you what to do? But then there's always going to be a lot of buyers out there who'll be like, hey, have you seen this new tray that could be used in meat packaging, for example? And, you know, they are supposed to keep their fingers on the pulse. It's easier said than done, but they get all access to the retail news and what have you, and they've got an opinion. At the end of the day, they know what sells on shelf. They have all of the sales data, so they'll be able to say to you, well, my advice would be do it this way as opposed to that way. And then you can go and look on the shelf and go, well, I know that product sells better than that product, which means potentially that might be my product, that's how I'm going to get my product in because they're not moving fast enough. So buyers will get frustrated if they give feedback and they don't see things actioned. So, you know, if you've asked for the feedback, at least attempt to do something with it as well. Obviously within the product, going back to food safety and making sure that you've got the paperwork in place. Now, unless you're doing an own label product, you won't get audited. If you're doing their own label products, then you will be audited from a health and safety and technical standards. But in general, if you're being set up as a new line, they'll just ask for your various certifications that you've got, and they'll expect you to have it in line with what that retailer expectations are. And you can email them ahead of time and ask what their expectations are in terms of food certification. Okay, my last point is packaging. Packaging is your real estate. I cannot strongly emphasize this one enough. I have seen some absolute howlers of packaging put in front of me, and I'm talking from the big boys. I'm talking Unilever, I'm talking P&G, and I'm talking PepsiCo. Packaging is so important and should be when you are first developing a product, developing a range of products, should be the thing that you spend as much time on that as you do on the product. So making sure that you've got your unique selling point front and center on the pack. Making sure that you've got your messaging hierarchy in terms of what's important to customers on that pack. Don't repeat things over and over and over again on the front of pack. It's a waste of real estate. I've seen countless examples where I've seen made in WA, made in Australia 3 times on the front of a pack. That's completely pointless. You only need to put it on once. I am not a marketeer, I'm not a design person, I am an armchair marketeer at best. But putting things on like that, remember what your brand attributes are and what your product attributes are. If your product is gluten-free, put it on the pack. So really look at what your important messaging hierarchies are and understanding that and making sure whatever you guys are talking about in terms of what your brand stands for and your product stands for, that should be what's on your pack. Does that make sense? So really understanding and understanding what that clear messaging hierarchy is. It could be made with traditional recipes. Is that a really important, an authentic Italian recipe, for example? Is that really important? Is it really important that you've put made in Australia on the front of pack? Is it important about gluten-free, paleo, whatever the latest thing is? Protein is the latest. And within that, making sure that the back of the pack is equally the same, correct labeling, nutritional panel. But be really clear about what is important in terms of what goes on the front of the pack and what goes on the back of the pack. And just remember, when you guys are designing all of this, you're really close to it. So, and you're too close to it. So show it to friends, show it to family members, Hell, take it into a shop and ask for feedback from customers. Go and say to them what you think, and walk into a Coles, a Woolworths, an IGA, anywhere, or stand outside and say, look, we're just designing this, can we get some feedback, please? Because don't forget, friends and family sometimes will tell you what you want to hear. Within that, there's also this thing called shelf-ready packaging, which is basically the outer carton that will go onto the shelf. And Coles and Woolworths have moved the majority of their products to that. IGA are doing the same, and Aldi have also got it as well. So making sure that you've not forgotten that that needs to be important in terms of the quality, the perforations need to be really spot on because it's quick, but also that's also your real estate in terms of being able just, even if it's just putting your brand on the front of the pack, making sure you've done that as well. Any questions? So that's it in terms of product, making sure that you've really thought through every part of that process in terms of standing out what your key USP is and have you articulated it clearly. So if the buyer remembers nothing else when they've walked out that meeting, they know exactly what your product is and what the product and the brand stand for. Okay, I've based this on the 4 Ps in case you haven't noticed. So price. This is a difficult one to figure out, but try and figure out if you know what their margin expectations are, their margin percent expectations are. Now, I'm going to apologise for the comment I'm going to make, which is rare for me, but please be clear about the difference between markup and margin percent. Does everybody know the difference?
You always have to make sure you've got it right.
Okay, so markup has nothing to do with margin. So if the retailer's margin expectations, for example, are 30%, you need to make sure it's 30% margin that they're going to make in terms of their profit. You don't turn it up by 30% in terms of increase from your cost price to your retail price by 30%. That doesn't equate to a retailer margin of 30%. Now, the reason I'm saying this is because I have come across 5 companies who have all done that and did not know the difference. So I want to make sure that everybody is clear that they know the difference. Markup is not margin percent, and it will come back to bite you when a retailer said, well, you haven't met my margin expectations and you've costed everything up incorrectly. So make sure, and I know it's difficult to understand what their margin expectations are ahead of time, but if you can look at a retailer's pricing on shelf, the retailer may have given you in their briefing up front in terms of their invite to a range review what their expectations are. Coles and Woolworths do tend to if you've been invited to a range review. IGA can vary, so it's very different. Aldi, they have got lower margin expectations, but making sure that you have done your research, so understanding, I'm sure you've got an idea of what other people kind of would cost a product up to, and then the retail price, so you can therefore get a good guidance. But the other thing is I would emphasise to say is on the day, don't be afraid to ask, what are your margin percent expectations? It's okay. The worst they're going to say is, I can't tell you that, in which case it kind of seems pretty pointless. Why wouldn't they tell you that? But they'll say ballpark about 30%, 40%, whatever that number is. So they will provide that information. Within that, making sure that you've reviewed your pricing both bottom up and top down. So knowing that your cost of goods is this, your list price to whoever you're selling to is X, so that you've made your margin, not markup, and then the retail price as well, so that everyone makes a profit. Contrary to what everyone thinks, retailers will give you the squeeze, but they still do want everybody to make a profit at some point. They just like to make a bit more, I'm not going to lie. Okay, have you value engineered to ensure you can maximise? What do I mean by that? So have you removed as much cost from the product, from the packaging, from the entire supply chain, to make sure that your price is going to be as competitive as possible? Basically, you guys need to make sure that the price, the retail price that you are recommending at shelf is competitive versus other products. So if you're going in at $8 and the rest of the market is at $5, it's never going to happen unless, of course, you've got something wowie up your sleeve in terms of your USP. So making sure that you are able to set a competitive price. Part of that is making sure that you have value engineered as much as possible. Have you shopped around for the packaging, the ingredients? Have you looked at how you're making the product and stripped out as much cost as possible so that you can maximise your profit and be able to meet retailer expectations? The final point would be, have you factored in the cost of promotions and the trading terms? Now, this is a big one that I know can kind of catch people unawares. Now, firstly, just to give you guys the heads up, any new supplier that is being signed up by Coles and Woolworths in the last 2 years no longer needs to pay for trading terms. So Coles and Woolworths haven't formally gone out and announced that, but as part of the Grocery Supplier Code of Conduct, you don't pay trading terms. It's all net. So, which is a good thing because it's a real pain to figure it out. So making sure though that you have factored in cost of promotions, and what I mean by that, price promotions at shelf, understanding what their funding expectations would be. Most of them have an expectation that if they've gone a price promotion and they've taken $1 off, that you fund it by the dollar, so you're fully funding it. Coming from England, that's called overfunding, and they only expect margin maintenance. So it drives me crazy, even as an ex-buyer here, that they expect us to overfund it. That's why they love promotions, guys, is because it's profitable for them to do it. And I'm not here to sugarcoat it. You guys need to know they like promotions because it's good for their bottom line, because they get it overfunded. So they might be encouraging you to do more promotions. That might not fit with your brand. Making sure that you don't suddenly become a deal junkie and a promotions junkie. If your product is a high-end product, you don't want to be that case. So really thinking through what your promotional strategy is. You might want to promote once every 8 weeks as opposed to every other week that's currently on shelf. If you look at Coca-Cola, every week they are on promotion. 1 week in Coles, the next week in Woolworths. You don't want to be like that. And if you look at most of the big categories, that's the case. When it comes to the kind of more premium products, you guys would be looking at things like 4 to 8 weeks in terms of a cycle. And as a minimum, they would expect at least a 15% kind of off at shelf price. So just please make sure that you factored that into your budgets and your cost prices, because it's one that I've seen happen time and time again, that people have gone in and presented and they've got it all agreed, and then suddenly it's like, well, I need a promotional plan, and they've forgotten to cost in the factor of promotion. So it's an important one that you make sure that you've costed in up front.
Who dictates how regularly you run a promotion?
No one dictates it. It tends to be a conversation between the two companies. So for example, a company I've worked with recently, we went to them with a promotion and promotional strategy that we said we wanted to promote every 6 weeks for 2 weeks at a time, because we've been doing 1 week promotions. What you end up doing is putting together what they call a promo grid with your suggested, and they will then look at everything together, and it's the clash grid, and a buyer will sit there and take everybody's products together and make sure that they're not putting you on at the same time as a comparable product, so that there's clear air time. So to be honest, it's a bit of a negotiation. And again, it's one where I would invite feedback from the buyer as well. They'll know their category, they know what works better, whether it's a 1 week promotion, a 2 week promotion. So making sure that you kind of have an open dialogue. They'll also be saying, well, I can't do that week because so-and-so else is on, and putting it. So that one's more of an open dialogue / negotiation, not too much of a negotiation. If you get to the point where you've got joint business plans, and it's part of your joint business plan in terms of start of the year, they may be saying, we want promotions, we want you to be promoting for 16 weeks of the year. But still, it comes down to dialogue as to how it's scheduled. my advice to you guys is making sure that you understand, you always know if you're going to promote that you're going to see sales dip the couple of weeks afterwards because people potentially would bulk buy, they might put it in the freezer. So one of the categories that I've worked on as a buyer was the egg category. The most price inelastic category I've ever worked on. No point in promoting that product, none whatsoever, because people don't consume any more eggs just because they bought it on promotion. So not only did it basically take sales from the following week, but it also took sales from the following 3 weeks. And we very quickly decided that it wasn't worth promoting eggs. And you'll see that the egg category is very, very rarely promoted. It's on everyday low prices. So making sure that you guys understand the consumption. You know, the yogurt category is a heavily, heavily promoted category. So, but we know that when they get promoted, especially the little individual pots, that mums will feed their kids more and they'll consume more. So making sure that you understand the consumption occasion, and if promotions are going to get consumers to consume more, then they're going to have a bigger frequency of purchase. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And what dictates what products go into a catalogue?
What dictates sales? So if they believe, I mean, firstly, a national product, it has to be a national product to go into catalogue. We're talking Coles and Woolworths here. Unless, of course, they do a WA page. It comes, I'm not going to lie, it comes down to this thing called Promo Fight Club, and all the buyers go into a fight club, basically. So what we would all do as buyers is we put our products into the ring, and it's done at least 12 to 16 weeks out. Brochures, as a Woolworths buyer, were the bane of my existence. We spent far too much time as buyers working on those catalogues. So you would put your you would do your slotting grid, as we call it, or the clash grid, and then we would go into a promotions meeting with our immediate team. And my immediate team at the time was chips, soft drinks, biscuits, and chocolate. All the stuff that's good for you. So we would then go into it. The boss would turn around, and literally it was Fight Club. The boss would turn around and go, okay, soft drink buyer, what have you got? Sam on chips, what have you got? We'd fight for our slots, so whichever one was the best deal would get the hero on that particular page. And then he'd take the best of the best, and then he'd go to Fight Club with his opposites and peers in the other different categories. And that would determine whether the ambient kind of snacking area would get 1 page or 2 pages. You always see the fact that Coca-Cola, chips, chocolate, they're always seen as footfall drivers, so they're quite a big one. The same applies with cereal. So it comes down to, like, you know, is that going to deliver $2 million worth of incremental sales versus something that's going to deliver nothing? So it does come down to sales, which is why you see most of the national brands playing in those spaces. So, but yeah, it's basically Fight Club. It gets quite vicious. It was a Wednesday afternoon without fail. And, you know, if you've got a good reputation or good relationship with your buyer, I strongly encourage you to, like, get on the phone to them, give them a bit of eye of the tiger. Like, I used to have Pepsi on the phone all the time. Sam, what are you going to get for us this week? And I'm like, your deal's not strong enough. You're going to have to improve your deal. So, but that's where you've got into the world of HighLow every other week. And it's a dangerous place to be, because once you're on that juggernaut, you cannot get back off of it. So, but in terms of, they don't do it often enough in terms of those local pages. But when it comes to the likes of IGA, you can pay for space. I don't know whether the return, it varies by category, whether the return on investment's there. I do know you can negotiate that price. I would strongly encourage you guys to negotiate as low as you possibly can. But it comes down to whether you're going to get the return on investment. Cool. What have I done? Okay, place. So what is your sales channel strategy? So what are you? Do you sell to wholesale? Are you selling to retail? Are you doing a bit of both? Making sure that you have a real clear understanding of kind of the different channels that you should be selling to. Are you an online platform? And within that then, how do you differentiate your proposal? One of the big bugbears that you could come across is if you've put the same product into one retailer and they get a bit narky because you've then gone and done the same thing in another retailer and they've undercut the price. So making sure that you, without putting any cost into your business, you really understand in terms of can you differentiate that proposal, making sure you've got a different channel strategy. I strongly encourage you guys to look at each of your channels by understanding what your margin percents are and maximizing in certain channels where you can get higher margin percents and profit maxing those channels. For example, online could be a much easier way for you guys because you haven't got the cost of logistics other than just postage and packaging or whatever to do. So really understanding kind of how you differentiate it so that you don't have those uncomfortable phone calls with buyers. And within that, again, I come back to don't discount any new opportunity until you have investigated it. So don't just say, oh, my product doesn't fit in Woolworths or my product won't fit in Costco. You might find that it actually, something that you've completely discounted actually will work brilliantly for you. So make sure that you've looked at it first and understood what their expectations are, and it may be something that's really easy for you guys to tweak and you've just landed yourself a really nice big volume deal. You never know. So again, this is one where don't discount it at all. For those of you who are looking at, who have got websites, have you set it up for commerce? And within that, make sure that doesn't conflict. So make sure if you're proposing a recommended retail to Coles or Woolworths or anybody for $10, that you're not then selling it on your website for $8, $9. Because when a buyer's looking at you, they will be looking, they will go away when they get time, probably running to and from meetings, looking at your website, Facebook page, Instagram, and seeing what you're doing in terms of those sorts of things. So if they then see that you've proposed it at $10 to them, but you're selling it at $8, pretty sure you're not going to get listed. So things like that, making sure that you really understand your various things and have you set your website. Can you be a commerce business? You never know. It could just be incremental sales for you. Within that, what's the best logistics and distribution strategy? So understanding, should you be looking at using primary freight from the likes of Coles or Woolworths, using a transport company, or even doing it yourself with a little truck or a third-party distributor. So that is where a big cost comes involved and can be a major headache. It's not the easiest to do in WA. It blows my mind how expensive the cost of freight is here. It blew my mind how expensive the cost of freight was in Australia and when I was living in Sydney, and then I moved across here and it kind of doubled. So I think the transport companies are having an absolute field day here. But at the end of the day, this is one where I believe strongly that as companies within WA, we should work better together in terms of what more can we do. For example, there is no distribution company that goes down south, chocks around all the little guys down there, picks it up and then delivers it into Coles, which is just such a missed opportunity. And Coles have been trying to figure out if they could do it with their backhauling in terms of primary freight. But working with your neighbours, because some of you will all be located in similar parks or what have you, and being able to figure out can you reduce the cost is a big one in terms of understanding the distribution, because it can be a major cost, and worse than that as well, it can be a major headache. So if you get your distribution wrong and you don't deliver on time and in full, again, you stand the chance of either not getting listed or getting delisted because you've been listed and you've not delivered correctly. So really making sure you know that and having a clear strategy. It's not something you need to talk loads about in the presentation, but it's something that's an important part, because if you don't deliver on time and in full, the buyer's going to get a phone call because their service level is not going to be good enough. So it's a KPI for you guys to remember ongoing. That is a really important one. It's the difference between you guys hearing from your buyers every once in a while versus getting a really grumpy buyer on the phone and shouting down the phone at you. You can ask PepsiCo. I was a real sod to them when they failed to deliver. Okay, final one, promotion. You cannot put your product on the shelf and walk away. It is your responsibility to drive your brand and your product at shelf. The ones that put it on the shelf, walk away and count the pennies, will only be counting them for so long. So you guys need to be doing everything you can in terms of the marketing above the line, below the line, and driving footfall into those stores or online platforms. So making sure that you are looking at what the most optimum in terms of marketing mediums are, in terms of driving brand awareness. And within that understanding, do you have brand loyalty? And if you have it, how do you demonstrate that to a buyer? Saying I've got 10,000 followers on Facebook doesn't demonstrate brand loyalty, but showing interaction and engagement on the page and in Instagram, and seeing that, you know, sales increase when you've put this post out or that post out, that will demonstrate it. And if not, how do you create it? Brand loyalty and product loyalty is like, if you can deliver that, is so important. So again, that comes back to delivering your unique selling points. That will help in terms of driving your brand loyalty and why customers will buy your product over somebody else's product. Coming back to this again in terms of that retailer price promotional strategy at shelf. So we talked about it in price, but it's just something for you to be aware of, that when you are putting your presentation together, you should have a promo slotting grid in terms of this is what we think, but use it as an open conversation. So a simple spreadsheet in terms of week 1 through to 52 or do 6 months, and this is what we're talking about, and use it as a kind of an open conversation in terms of that slotting grid. But within that, please budget for it, guys. The final one is, have you built in a budget for marketing? Which should be 3 to 5% of sales turnover. If you haven't, 1st of July is coming up, and I'm guessing you're all budgeting for next year. Please go away and build in a marketing budget. That's to include social media posts, price promotions, merchandising teams, because Coles and Woolworths expect you and IGA to have merchandising teams out there. I don't necessarily agree, because we pay them enough money, they should employ their own staff. But at the end of the day, you need to make sure that your products are on shelf, and the stores will only do so much. So if you are a national player, the expectation is that you would have reps and merchandisers on the road, making sure that your products are actually on the shelf and the stocks have been filled and the tickets are all correct. So that should be part of your marketing budget, and it should be factored in. And being able to just say these points that I would, you know, you don't need to tell them that you've got a marketing budget, but making sure that you've got it, but being able to say, this is my price promotional strategy. This is an example of some of my social media posts. This is my website. This is my merchandising team. I use so-and-so, so we'll be able to support your stores. All of those go to show that you are the end-to-end solution on a product. Any questions?
Sam, with,
Yeah.
With the, so you do the presentation, I'm just trying to get then the sort of the pipeline after that. So,
Yep.
And they're interested in your product. What is then the ordering process and the, you know, is there you're talking about a deal or a buy, or, so I just want to understand that sort of next stage.
So in terms of a product, so you've gone and presented for the first time, you've never been listed, you've just been told, yeah, we want to take your product. The first thing that will happen is you'll be sent a load of forms. Good luck with those.
Yeah.
I apologise. By the way, buyers aren't trained on how to fill those forms in. Just so you know, first time I saw them was when I stepped the other side of the fence. So you will be set up as a supplier vendor. You will be asked to fill in a load of either UBFs, Universal Business Form, or New Line forms in the world of Coles, along with your GS1s, your GTINs, and all of those sorts of things. Set aside a day or two to fill those forms in. They're mind-numbingly dull. I'm sure a few of you will agree with me. And from there, they will log you into the system. And as part of that, depending on who you're dealing with, they will talk to you about your ordering cycle. So what days would be better for you to receive an order, and what day they would want it delivered into DC. So for example, one of the suppliers that I negotiated for, we would receive an order on a Monday, and it would be delivered, and it would be fortnightly orders on a Monday, and it would be delivered into the DC on the Thursday, so that we could ensure that we had a day's fresh production. So, and along that, you get a fairly good idea. It's difficult in the early days in terms of understanding kind of stock holding. They're not supposed to supply you sales data, but there's nice buyers out there. Ask them if they can give you an idea of sales data or stock holding. And so you can then start to plan, okay, I'm going to get a massive order this week versus, oh no, they've still got quite a lot of stock holding. So again, it comes down to, that would be the next step. So you'd be filling in universal buying forms, new line forms. You'd be having to send in your example packaging because they would measure it, and empty packaging in terms of being able to put it onto their planograms. And then you would be told in terms of what your order cycle would be. And they'll give you an outline in terms of like a range review. You would normally deliver into DC 2 weeks out from when the implementation into stores go to. Both Coles and Woolworths, if you've been invited to a range review tender, or you phoned up and said, I'd like to be on your next range review email list, they will have those dates, and they're quite hard dates. It's 26 weeks out in terms of range reviews. So they will have hard dates in the system, and some of those will be around GS1, making sure you've sent your GS1 barcodes and stuff in as well. So, but ordering is normally, for the first pipe fill, would be 2 weeks out, and then they would release the planograms normally 10 to 14 days later, and then stores are supposed to have, varies, but 2 to 4 weeks to implement those merchandising planograms. And that's when you need a merchandising team, because the stores don't do it and they're not very compliant to it. So they would be doing those. So they normally would get the major players to implement a range review for them. After that, the two main, and Aldi are brilliant when it comes to their orders. Again, the same, you would work with them. IGA, it varies in terms of what you're doing. And Costco will work with you as well, from what I've been told, in terms of their ordering as well. But IGA, obviously, because it's independence and depending whether you're delivering to Metcash. But most of them want to work with you because the last thing they want is service level issue.
Yeah.
Does that answer the question?
Yeah.
Cool. Any more questions? No. Okay. In summary, so tailor your presentation and proposal based on who you're meeting with, and don't be afraid to ask questions. Ask them questions. If they remember nothing, make sure they know your USPs. Buyers are busy people. They go from one meeting to another. Their prep is on the way to a meeting, normally in the lift on the way down. If your RRP is not competitive with current products on the shelf, you have no hope, unless you've got some golden nugget. Make sure you have a clear, defined channel strategy. That doesn't mean you have to present that to the buyer that you're seeing that day, but it makes sure that you guys don't have any issues in terms of going forward. The marketing plan is important. Don't go on and on about it in terms of your presentation, but make sure you do have a plan to drive brand awareness and product awareness. And finally, keep it shorter and simpler and to the point, unlike what I've probably just done. And ask for feedback. I can't strongly encourage that enough. All right, all done. Now, ready for Thursday, I've done a bit of research and had a few phone calls with regards to Costco. So for those of you that are going on Thursday, I haven't done a slide on it, but just a few things for you guys to be aware of. They operate in 11 countries as a wholesale warehouse club. So for those of you who may have seen it on the East Coast, you have to be a member to join, and that's where they make their money. That membership fee is about $60. They have the widest selection you've ever seen in your life. It is ridiculous. You can get your hearing aids, you can get diamonds, you can get televisions, and you can get meat. So it is, as well as the services, and by the way, their pizzas are amazing. So they have a huge selection. They do a lot of their primary meats cutting in store. They have bakeries in store. They make, again, amazing muffins. They now, and the tyres can be changed as well. And based on Sydney, they were definitely the cheapest in the market. They undercut Kmart. So they have 9 locations in Australia. Their own brand is Kirkland, well established in America, and that's across globally. Don't be deceived. It might look cheap, guys, and it is cheap, but you have to buy bulk. So a lot of what they talk about in terms of their corporate is encouraging, like, unless it's a big family, like you basically go a couple of you and you basically divide it down, because the meat trays are like that size. So they're massive. Just so you guys are aware, their Australian sales last year were 1.8 billion. That's 14% growth year on year, but at like-for-like level, that's 5%. Does everyone know what I mean by like-for-like? So the same number of stores year on year. So they obviously opened 2 stores, so they delivered 5% like-for-like growth. So if they had 7 stores the previous year, 7 stores that year, their growth was 5%. The additional 2 stores that they opened added the extra 7% to take it to 14%. That was bad maths, 9% to add it to 14%. Now to compare that to Coles and Woolworths, Coles like-for-like last year was 1.1%. Woolworths was 4.3%. They had a really bad year the year before. Now, they normally work on about 5% margin at a company level. So their margin at company level is 5%. But by categories, they slim their margins down because they make all of their profit predominantly through the membership fee of $60. So they could operate as low as 5% on some categories, and their probably highest is about 20%. But when you're talking to them, just remember that whatever they're asking for is definitely going to be bulk. All right, hope that helps.
Thank you.
So firstly, thanks very much, Sam. Appreciate you coming in today and having a chat to everyone. I'm sure everyone's learned a bit today. There were a couple of things I just wanted to ask you. We spoke to a number of companies in the lead up to I guess, engaging with Costco. And you mentioned before the packaging. So you've got one thing that a couple of companies said to us was that they actually focused on the external packaging, the carton packaging for Costco, because their individual product packaging might have looked great, but no one actually got to see that. So they actually rejigged it. So for product they were supplying into a Coles or a Woolies, they were more focused on the actual product packaging. And for Costco, they spent more time and effort and money on the external carton packaging, so that would stand out. I'm a little bit worried about the bulk buying of the hearing aids. I don't know how you get a group together for that, but outside of that,
I don't know.
But the other thing I want to say, and I'm sure you've seen this as well, is often it's not the first meeting or the first product, And what I've noticed with the more successful WA firms that I've engaged with who are doing well in the major retailers is that it's often been their persistence of number of meetings, going back with a slightly varied product and just working, just as you do any relationship. As Trish knows, I had to ask my wife out 6 times before she went on a date with me. But it's that being persistent and sticking with it, I think, is a really key strategy. So I really just see Thursdays as that first dip of the toe in the water. Get a feel for whether there's the potential there and be prepared for the long haul in terms of working progressively.
Yeah, the first meeting, guys, can often, like, you walk out and you're either on top of the world or you're like, what just happened? Don't be afraid to go back and ask for feedback. Don't get too frustrated when you don't get that feedback. But still show willing and ask for that feedback and keep knocking at the door. There are a few examples in WA. One company that I'd like to hope that you've all kind of come across, which is ePastI. He started off in 15 stores in Woolworths, and very shortly will have a national contract with Woolworths in 5 years. But he tailored every single time in terms of the recipe and those sorts of things. So, and there's multiple examples of those sorts of people that have done that and tailored and tinkered around with things and taken on board feedback. So, and the other thing is, having been at the mercy of this more than a few times, buyers change every 18 months to 2 years. So just because one buyer doesn't see the opportunity doesn't mean the next one that comes along won't do that. So there's always, you know, a different perception and a different look, and a new buyer that comes in wants to shake things up and look a star. So, you know, your job is to make them look good and bring them the magic formula of a new product that they've never seen before, or, you know, does something different or has a much better USP than what's already on the shelf. So yeah, don't lose faith, just kind of come back, regroup, have a look at it, and yeah, look at it through a different lens, ask people for feedback, what would make them buy it, and tinker with the proposal.
Excellent. And look, just in closing, guys, we're also in conversation at the moment with Julia Kern, the Australian MD for Kirkland. Kirkland, as you probably know, have just built a $460 million warehouse, which they've got to fill. So they'll be over in the next few months as well, and they'll also be keen to engage with West Australian firms. They don't at the moment have a West Australian outlet in their plan, but they have three Melbourne-based supermarkets that will be opening soon. So if you're not on the closed Facebook group, or if you don't receive our newsletters, touch base with Trish or Amelia and get yourself on those, and keep up to date with when they're coming over. Alrighty, that's it for us. Thank you very much, Sam. What am I going to do?
One more slide.
Oh, one more slide.
There you go.
Oh, okay, great. Thanks, guys. Hope it was of value to you, and we'll see most of you Thursday.